What is the connection between the creator of Cornflakes and the ban on masturbation? Masturbation, what do the main religions say? In the late 19th century, John Harvey Kellogg, a follower of the Christian group called Seventh-day Adventists and the creator of Cornflakes, expressed great concern about the secret sin of masturbation. Kellogg understood that masturbation was the gateway to other luxurious practices and, in addition, could cause sexual diseases, as well as other diseases, which at the time had no known cause, such as epilepsy and madness. With all the medical and scientific knowledge we have today, I know that associating masturbation with the appearance of such diseases seems to us to be completely absurd, but it is important to emphasize that this was the prevailing conviction about the consequences of masturbation until the mid-20th century. But if you think about it, you probably know someone who usually attributes the appearance of illnesses to some committed sin. It is a very common connection among religious people. About this relationship of attributing the emergence of diseases to the practice of sins, let's make a brief reflection. A scientifically proven fact, through various experiments carried out by psychologists and neuroscientists, is that toxic emotions can lead to the emergence of diseases. This is something we all already know. So, in my view, the most logical conclusion is that it is not the sin that leads to the appearance of diseases, but rather the anguish, the feeling of guilt and the anxiety that the person feels when he fails to comply with the teachings of the church and commits a sin. That is, it is the repression that religions impose on people, generating destructive feelings, such as guilt and anguish, which can lead to the appearance of illnesses, and not the simple practice of the sinful act. After this brief reflection, it is worth highlighting a very interesting fact. Mr. Kellogg's cornflakes were laced with nutrients he believed could curb sexual desire among young people. Regarding the girls, the Adventist noble had a more than special recommendation. Kellogg recommended rubbing carbolic acid, tar, on the clitoris. According to him, it would be an efficient way to appease the abnormal excitement for girls who had the habit of masturbating. If you don't know what tar is, it's a black, viscous liquid, or semi-solid, that serves as raw material for plastics, solvents, paints, and countless organic chemical compounds. Mr. Kellogg's attitude did not come out of a vacuum. He did not come to such conclusions on his own. In order to understand the historical roots of the thinking that led Mr. Kellogg to take such attitudes from now on, using the history of the creator of cornflakes as a backdrop, we will briefly address what the main religious currents say about masturbation. So, do you know what Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, and Islam teach their followers about masturbation? Wait just a moment before we continue. Let me introduce myself real quick. Welcome to the Knowledge Society. My name is André Frossard Signes. I'm curious by nature, and I have a bachelor's degree in political science. But the real truth is that I am passionate about general history, philosophy, spirituality, meditation, psychoanalysis, psychology, human sexuality, and the history of religion. I do not pretend to call myself an expert in any of these areas. Far from it. I'm just a skeptic, a questioner, who created a YouTube channel for the purpose of sharing my experiences. Here you will learn things that are not talked about on any other YouTube channel. This is because the Knowledge Society scripts are taken directly from books. No chat, no copying and pasting of subjects that are already saturated. My goal is to bring quality content that can really add some knowledge to your life, even if it's just a little bit. For example, I know you clicked to watch the video because the title probably caught your eye, or the cover probably piqued your curiosity. I won't deny that I would click too. In the end, sexuality is always a topic that arouses a lot of interest. If you are subscribed here on the channel, you already know that we always go far beyond a title and a flashy thumbnail to get your click. As the name suggests, Knowledge Society, we always make an introduction to the topic to contextualize and level all people. In the end, we have no way of knowing what level of prior knowledge our subscribers have on the subject addressed. Shall we continue our story? As I mentioned, the thought of Mr. Kellogg, the creator of Cornflakes, did not come to him. In Judaism and Christianity, the prohibition of practicing solitary sex has a long tradition, despite not having an explicit prohibition in the Bible. The biblical story that supports the unfavorable interpretation of masturbation is the story of Onan, who is killed by God for having interrupted coitus during the sexual act with his wife, not for masturbating. In other words, interrupting intercourse means that he has not deposited semen inside his wife. Another text that supports the Church's orientation against masturbation is the following fragment contained in the Old Testament. Do not waste your seed, Sem, on the ground. For an ancient rabbinical tradition which interprets this text in a radical way, wasting semen would be equivalent to taking the lives of future children. In classical Hebrew, the expression for masturbation is hashatat zara, which means conscious destruction of the seed. Here it is worth making another reflection. We know well that Christianity is champion in repealing Old Testament ordinances when it suits it, or when the practices are no longer socially tolerable. For example, the obligation to keep the Sabbath, still maintained by a small part of Christians, or the obligation to stone certain sins to death, or even the sacrifice of animals, practices that would no longer be socially tolerated today. If the Church is able to discard practices that are no longer in line with modern times, why not change its policy regarding sex? Against the offensive of the modern understanding that masturbation is a natural phenomenon of body knowledge and sexual development, especially among young people, the Church reinforced its understanding that, according to the New Testament, when mentioning terms such as lust and impurity, the practice of masturbation would be doomed. In Judaism, rabbinical tradition interpreted Isaiah's enigmatic reference, "Your hands are full of blood," as a metaphor for the reprehensibility of masturbation. Did you get the reference? Masturbation, dirty hands, waste of seed, bloody hands. In the interpretation of law, this type of reasoning could be classified as an expansive, systematic, or teleological interpretation. Let's reason together now. The texts contained in the Old Testament expressly address the waste of semen. So female masturbation would not deserve condemnation and should be considered irrelevant, because it has no practical consequences for procreation, correct? Well, as you already know, that was not the conclusion of Mr. Kellogg, who proposed rubbing tar on the clitoris. But you see, we can't crucify Mr. Kellogg because he, like a good believer, just followed the Church's commandments. Since women don't waste the seed, then could they masturbate? Now, my dears, it would be very naive of us to expect that an institution like the Church, which has a historical tradition of systematically regulating people's sexual behavior, could come to the conclusion that women could masturbate freely. Hard to imagine, isn't it? In 1994, the U.S. Minister of Health publicly speculated that it would be a good idea to encourage masturbation, to reduce the incidence of risky sexual practices and the spread of STDs, but was immediately dismissed by then-President Bill Clinton after negative reactions from conservative Christians. Leaving Christianity and Judaism and speaking of Islam, the Quran advocates, for example, that man must protect his sexual organ against everything that is outside the context of conjugal sex. Muhammad said, "Whoever is unfit to marry must fast, for fasting weakens his sexual appetite." I remember well that when I was between 15 and 17 years old, if I followed Muhammad's advice to calm my hormones, I would have to fast until I disappeared because all I thought about was sex. Since we're all well fed, we can continue our conversation. Notwithstanding Muhammad's assertion, today there is some disagreement among Muslims regarding masturbation. While Shiites, which is the most radical stream of Islam, generally condemn it, other variants of Islam cannot come to terms with the extent to which masturbation should be banned or simply considered irrelevant. Some Sunni scholars feel that masturbation is permissible for singles when one is in danger of committing the sin of fornication, or when there is no other way to relieve extreme sexual tension. A similar understanding has already been defended by some Christian leaders, but it is far from being a dominant position. James Dobson, founder of the Christian American fundamental metalist lobby, Focus on the Family, used to say, for example, that it is better to lighten up than to lose focus under so many daily pressures. According to him, masturbation is not something the church should be concerned about. But it is already more than clear that this concession to masturbation is a minority understanding within Christianity, and is also far from being a consensus within Islam. To end our study today, let's talk about Buddhism. As you can imagine, Buddhism's pervasive skepticism around sex and desire makes masturbation, in principle, something don't recommended. It is worth remembering that unlike Christianity, which seeks to regulate sexual behavior in society, Buddhism does not strive to regulate the sexuality of people who have not decided to remain abstinent. In the Vinaya text, from the 1st century BC, there are references to acrobatic monks who were able to practice anal and oral sex alone. Buddha considered this, like any other form of solitary sex, to be an offense against the monastic code. André, and in relation to women, in Buddhism, how does it work? You see, they were seen as having more sexual desires than men. In addition to the explicit prohibition for nuns to avoid a number of vegetables such as cucumbers, leeks, and turnips, as they could serve as dildos, nuns were also advised to wash their private parts in a way that would not cause them pleasure. I know it sounds hard to believe, but all these references, the religious texts, the sources, everything is in the book Sex and Religion. The link to buy the book is the first one in the description. Just to end our video, here's another very curious fact. The nuns also shouldn't use pads that are too close to the body, and, incredible as it may seem, there was even a recommendation that they shouldn't swim against the current, on the grounds that this could cause excitement. This ban on swimming against the current makes for a nice subject for a bar table, doesn't it? The first time I read this, I had a good laugh. From today, every time you eat cornflakes, I'm sure you'll remember me. Guys, I really hope you enjoyed today's video. Like and share a lot. If you want to follow me on Instagram, my @ is also in the description. In addition to the link to buy the book Sex and Religion, I will leave in the description the link to other books that I indicate, the links to the equipment I use for recording, as well as courses for you to go deeper into the topic if you are interested. As a matter of transparency and ethics, I always inform you that in all these links, we earn a small commission on sales. It's a way to maintain the channel because, as you can imagine, it takes a lot of work to make a video like this.